The chain was the first thing Marcus Thorne noticed, an obscene loop of hardened, rust-flecked steel that violated the pristine, almost sterile perfection of the Serenity Point community. It was a brutal, industrial thing, coiled like a venomous snake around the slender, brushed aluminum shaft of a light pole. Its coils continued, wrapping with a suffocating tightness around the bright, cheerful pink frame of his daughter's tricycle. A heavy, brass-colored padlock, disproportionately large and menacing, served as the clasp, a final, grim seal on an act of profound malice. For a long, silent moment, his mind refused to assemble the scene into a coherent reality. It felt like a surrealist installation, a bizarre piece of performance art placed jarringly on the manicured emerald lawn next to the communal mailboxes, a statement whose meaning was both elusive and painfully obvious. Then, the cold, creeping tide of comprehension washed over him, and with it came a chilling stillness, a dangerous, crystalline calm that settled deep in the marrow of his bones. This was not just any tricycle. This was Maya's, her Star Speeder 5000, her chariot of independence. It was an adaptive trike, a marvel of lightweight alloys and clever engineering, custom-built to support her 9-year-old body. It had specialized pedals with straps to hold her feet, a high-back seat with lateral supports for her spine, and handlebars designed for her specific grip. It was the singular device that granted his daughter, born with a form of spina bifida that had stolen the full use of her legs, a precious taste of the simple, kinetic joy of childhood that other children embraced without a thought, and some person in this neighborhood of immaculate facades, had chained it to a pole as if it were an abandoned shopping cart, a piece of junk, a public nuisance to be contained. His gaze, sharp and analytical, drifted to a piece of paper, clinically protected within a plastic laminate sheath and fastened to the handlebars by a white zip tie, pulled so tight it indented the foam grip. It was an official notice. The letterhead of the Serenity Point Homeowners Association printed in an elegant, serif font that was somehow both graceful and unforgiving. He didn't need to read the meticulously typed words to understand their origin, their tone, their intent. He could feel the cold, suffocating miasma of righteousness emanating from it. He knew the mind of the woman who had put it there, and, in that precise, crystalline moment of understanding, Marcus Thorne, the quiet, recently widowed father who spent his evenings coaching his daughter on how to navigate the treacherous landscape of sidewalk curbs and who celebrated every hard-won inch of her physical progress as if it were a moon landing, ceased to exist. He stepped aside, and another man took his place. In his stead stood Marcus Thorne, Lead Enforcement Counsel for the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. He was the man responsible for the enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act across 3 federal districts. A silent, relentless warrior in a war fought with legal briefs and federal statutes. The part of his life he had so carefully quarantined. The part that dealt with bullies of a far more corporate and systemic nature, had just been violently and irrevocably merged with his sacred role as a father. He took out his phone, his movements slow, deliberate, and devoid of any tremor. His thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't call the local police. He didn't call a locksmith. He called the direct line of his lead investigator in the regional office. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low, flat baritone, stripped of all emotion. "I have a situation developing here. It's a clear-cut case of discrimination, intimidation, and illegal restraint of a mobility device involving a minor with a disability. I need you to open a new file. The primary target is the Serenity Point Homeowners Association, and the specific individual of interest is its president, a woman named Karen Davenport." He paused. His eyes locked on the shackled tricycle, a vibrant symbol of his daughter's joy, now transformed into a heartbreaking emblem of targeted, calculated cruelty. A fire had been lit, a slow-burning, methodical fire in the heart of a man who knew precisely how to build a legal inferno. And the woman who had struck the match had no earthly idea of the conflagration that was coming for her. Choosing to live in Serenity Point had been a calculated decision, a move born of grief and a desperate need for stability. After his wife, Elena, had been taken from them by a swift and merciless cancer 2 years prior, Marcus's world had shrunk to a single, fiercely protected Point Maya. He needed a sanctuary, a place that was safe, quiet, and blessedly predictable. A stable environment where the loudest noise was the laughter of children and the greatest drama was a misplaced gardening tool. The community, with its rows of identical, aesthetically pleasing beige houses, its perfectly edged lawns, and an almost unnerving sense of enforced order, had seemed to fit the bill perfectly. He was aware of its reputation for having a zealous, almost tyrannical HOA. But he was a man who followed rules. It seemed a small, manageable price to pay for the peace of mind he craved for his daughter. His professional life was a world away, a stark contrast to the quiet domesticity he cultivated. His days were a landscape of dense legal briefs, sterile federal courtrooms, and tense, high-stakes negotiations with powerful corporations and entrenched municipalities that had, either through negligence or contempt, failed to comply with the law of the land. He fought for accessible public spaces, for fair housing practices, for the rights of millions of unseen people like his daughter, all on a grand, impersonal, and strategically vital scale. But when he came home, his world became small, intimate, and intensely personal. It was the smell of the gluten-free pancakes he'd finally mastered, the specific sound of Maya's delighted laughter as she recounted the intricate politics of her fourth-grade class, and the sacred nightly ritual of reading stories aloud until her breathing deepened into the soft, rhythmic cadence of sleep. It was Elena's memory that infused these rituals with their power. Be her rock. Marcus, she had whispered in her final days, her hand cool in his. But also, be her sword. The world isn't built for our girl. You'll have to make space for her. He was trying to be both. The centerpiece of Maya's world, the key that unlocked the kingdom of childhood outside their front door, was her tricycle. It was not a toy, a point he had to clarify repeatedly for insurance and school administrative purposes. It was classified as durable medical equipment, a mobility device as essential to her as a prosthetic limb or a hearing aid. But to Maya, it was pure magic. It was the legs she didn't quite have. It was the engine that gave her the power to race her friends to the ancient oak tree at the end of the block, the wings that allowed her to feel the wind whip through her hair, the vessel for exploring the small, safe universe of their cul-de-sac, its bright pink frame, a color she had chosen herself, and the glittering silver streamers she'd insisted on attaching to the handlebars, were a vibrant testament to her spirit, a joyful refusal to be defined or diminished by her physical limitations. His first direct encounter with Karen Davenport had occurred less than a month after they had moved in. On a sweltering July afternoon, Maya had ridden her trike onto their small, meticulously maintained front lawn and, with his help, had transferred from the seat and gone inside for a much-needed drink of water. The trike, her gleaming star speeder, sat on their porch for no more than 5 minutes. But in Serenity Point, 5 minutes was an eternity. Karen Davenport, a woman whose perfectly coiffed silver hair and crisp, immaculate linen outfit seemed to function as a kind of personal armor, had appeared as if summoned from the ether. She was holding a small, silver measuring tape in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Good afternoon," she had said, her smile a thin, bloodless curve that did not come close to reaching her cold, assessing eyes. "Mr. Thorne, is it? I'm Karen Davenport. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association." "A pleasure to meet you," Marcus had replied, extending a hand, which she regarded for a brief moment with something akin to distaste, before pointedly ignoring it. Her gaze, sharp as a shard of glass, flicked to the tricycle. "I'm afraid that will have to be moved immediately," she said, her voice a carefully modulated blend of polite society and unveiled condescension. "Our community bylaws, which you received a copy of at closing, are very clear. No personal items, and most especially, wheeled vehicles, are to be left in public view for any length of time. It disrupts the clean lines and uninterrupted vistas of the neighborhood aesthetic." A flash of hot, protective anger had surged through Marcus, but he had expertly suppressed it. He was new here. He didn't want to start a war on his own doorstep. "Of course," he said, his voice even and calm. "My daughter just came inside for a moment. We always store it in the garage when she's finished. It's her mobility device. It helps her get around." Karen's smile tightened, the skin around her eyes crinkling with something that was not amusement. "Be that as it may, a rule is a rule. It is the impartial application of our regulations that maintains the beauty and, more importantly, the property values of Serenity Point. We all make small sacrifices for the greater good. It is what makes this place so special." Without another word, she had turned, her posture radiating a smug, unassailable satisfaction, and glided away. The brief, sterile interaction had left a sour, metallic taste in Marcus's mouth. It wasn't just the pedantic obsession with rules that bothered him. It was the casual, almost reflexive, dehumanization of his child's needs. It was the clinical classification of his daughter's lifeline to the world as mere clutter, an aesthetic offense against an abstract, soulless concept of beauty. He had explained the incident to Maya later, who, with the profound and sometimes heartbreaking wisdom of a child who has had to navigate a world not designed for her, had simply shrugged her small shoulders. "She's just a grumpy lady. Daddy, her circuits are probably rusty. Let's put the star speeder in its hangar so she doesn't get space mad." He had marveled then, as he often did, at his daughter's incredible resilience, her alchemical ability to transform an act of petty cruelty into a game, a story. But he had also filed the incident away in the part of his brain reserved for professional analysis. He recognized the mindset with a chilling familiarity. It was the same sterile, bureaucratic thinking he fought every single day in his work. The insidious belief that accommodating people with disabilities was an imposition, an inconvenient and unsightly blemish on a world designed for the able-bodied majority. It was a mindset he was professionally trained to dismantle, piece by insidious piece. He just never, in his darkest imaginings, thought he would have to deploy that training 10 feet from his own front door. Now, standing in the bright, unforgiving afternoon sun, staring at the heavy chain and the laminated violation notice, he understood the chilling truth. The first encounter hadn't been a simple warning. It had been a prelude, an appetizer. This act, this deliberate, theatrical shackling of his daughter's mobility device to a public pole, was a declaration of war. Karen Davenport was not just a grumpy lady with rusty circuits. She was a calculated bully who had mistaken his politeness for weakness, his desire for peace as a sign of fear. She had seen a child's vulnerability not as something to be protected, but as a target to be exploited. And in doing so, she had kicked a hornet's nest of unimaginable size and fury. The full, crushing weight of federal law was a very big nest indeed. He took a deep, steadying breath, the white-hot anger inside him cooling and hardening into a sharp, lethal point of focus. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute over a misplaced item. This was a federal case, and he, Marcus Thorne, was going to prosecute it to the fullest, most devastating extent of the law. The first order of business was the liberation. Marcus walked back to his garage, the movements of his body feeling strangely distant, as if he were piloting a machine. He opened a large metal cabinet and retrieved a pair of heavy-duty, 36-inch bolt cutters. The tool felt foreign in his hands, which were more accustomed to the smooth leather of a legal brief or the heft of a statute book. The symbolism of the moment was not lost on him. He was a man of words, of injunctions and consent decrees. But for this first, visceral act of defiance, a more direct and unambiguous tool was required. He walked back to the light pole, the weight of the cutters in his hand both a burden and a profound comfort. A few neighbors were now openly watching from their windows, their faces pale blurs of curiosity behind the pristine glass. A woman, walking a small, trembling dog, paused on the sidewalk, her mouth slightly agape. He ignored them all. His focus narrowed to the point where the world consisted only of his hands, the tool, and the offending link of the chain. He positioned the hardened steel jaws around one of the thick links, finding a purchase. He took a steadying breath, channeling the cold rage that was churning in his gut into his arms and shoulders, and squeezed the long handles together. The metal groaned, a low, tortured sound of protest, and then it snapped with a loud, sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot in the preternatural quiet of the street. The severed chain fell away, landing on the soft, perfectly green grass with a heavy, satisfying thud. He meticulously snipped the zip tie that held the violation notice, his movements as precise as a surgeon's. He folded the laminated paper neatly and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. It was evidence. Exhibit A. He then turned, took hold of the handlebars of Maya's trike, and wheeled it home, his knuckles white against the foam grips. Maya was waiting at the window, her small face etched with an anxiety that twisted his heart. She had seen the whole thing from her room. "Daddy, what happened to my star speeder?" "Why was it tied up?" she asked, her voice small and trembling. The question that of any child whose favorite toy has been inexplicably taken away. Marcus knelt in front of her, forcing a reassuring smile onto his face. A smile he hoped masked the glacial fury in his eyes. A very confused lady made a very big mistake. "Sweetie," he said softly, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "And now Daddy has to help her understand the rules." The countermove came the next morning. As predictable as the sunrise, 2 local police officers, both looking young enough to be his college interns, arrived at his door. Their expressions were a mixture of official duty and acute discomfort. Karen Davenport, as expected, had filed a formal police report, destruction of private property her lock and chain, which she had valued at an absurd and inflammatory $50, and more ludicrously, creating a public disturbance. Marcus invited them in, his demeanor one of polite, professional calm. He offered them coffee, which they awkwardly declined. He then calmly and methodically explained the situation, gesturing to the custom features of the trike, which he had placed in the center of his living room. "This is a medical mobility device. Officers," he stated, his tone matter-of-fact, the tone he used when educating opposing counsel on a point of law they had clearly overlooked. "Under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, as well as the Fair Housing Act, it has the same legal protections as a wheelchair or a walker. Chaining it to a public pole is not only an act of discrimination, it is a federal offense punishable by significant civil penalties. Frankly, Ms. Davenport is very lucky that you're the ones at her door this morning. and not the U.S. Marshal Service. The two young officers, faced with a calm, articulate man quoting federal law with unnerving precision, exchanged a nervous look. This was clearly far above their pay grade. They took his statement, glanced at the severed chain and padlock which he had sealed in a large, labeled evidence bag, and left with the mumbled assurance that they would look into it. It was a classic brush-off, but it was the brush-off he had anticipated and, in fact, wanted. This was not a matter for local law enforcement. Karen, however, was clearly not content to let the authorities handle it. She was a woman who preferred to wield power directly. 2 days later, a new notice was posted on the ornate community bulletin board by the pool and, simultaneously, emailed to every resident of Serenity Point. An emergency and urgent HOA meeting had been called for the following Tuesday evening. The sole item on the agenda to discuss and vote on a new community bylaw pertaining to the proper storage and regulation of non-standard, modified, or oversized recreational vehicles on all common and private property visible from the street. It was a breathtakingly transparent piece of targeted legislation, written with the sole purpose of making Maya's life, and, by extension, his own, as difficult and unwelcome as possible. It was a strategic masterstroke of petty tyranny, designed to legally codify the very discrimination Karen had already practiced, and to get the entire community to co-sign her bigotry. This, Marcus knew with absolute certainty, was a critical, fatal error on her part. She was creating a public, official record of her discriminatory intent. His colleague, Sarah Jenkins, was practically giddy with professional delight when he forwarded her the email notification. "Oh, she is a gift, Marcus. A gift from the litigation gods," Sarah had exclaimed over the phone, her voice buzzing with energy. "She's doing our work for us. This is beautiful. A public meeting where she will, on the official record, propose and advocate for a rule that transparently violates both the Fair Housing Act and Title III of the ADA. Get me a clear audio and video recording of that meeting, Marcus. And we can bury her and the entire HOA in so many civil penalties, they'll be selling those perfect mailboxes to pay the legal fees." But even with this clear path to victory, a nagging sense of unease picked at the edges of Marcus's mind. Karen's aggression felt disproportionate, a tactical overreach, even for a power-obsessed HOA president. The sheer level of vitriol, the willingness to escalate so quickly, so publicly, and so cruelly over a single child's tricycle, it felt desperate. It felt like the flailing of a cornered animal. And people this desperate, he knew from long and bitter experience, were almost always hiding something far more significant than just an ugly personality. His instincts, honed by years of investigating complex cases where the stated conflict was merely a smokescreen for the real crime, told him that there was a deeper layer to this, a hidden basement beneath the floorboards of the conflict. The tricycle wasn't the cause of the fire. It was merely the spark that had landed on a pile of oily rags that had been waiting for years to ignite. It was an imperfection in Karen's perfectly curated world, an anomaly that she feared might draw unwanted attention. But attention to what? He tasked Sarah with a new line of inquiry, one that went far beyond the immediate conflict. Do a deep dive, Sarah, not just on Karen Davenport's personal history, but on Serenity Point itself. I want you to pull every public record you can find. I want the developer's name, Prescott Homes. I want the original construction permits, the zoning variances, the land grants. I want to know if they received any federal or state funding, any subsidies, any tax breaks. I want you to look for anything at all. That had to be certified as ADA compliant. You think this is bigger than just one nasty woman in a pantsuit? Sarah asked. her tone shifting from excitement to serious curiosity. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Sarah, Marcus said, a grim, cold certainty beginning to form in his mind. And Karen Davenport is acting like she lives in the most fragile, most expensive glass house in the entire world. I want to know what it's made of. And I want to know who helped her build it. The answer arrived on a Friday afternoon, 2 days before the scheduled HOA meeting. And it was a bombshell. It was the midpoint twist that redefined the entire conflict, transforming it from a skirmish into a full-scale war. Sarah's voice, when she called him, was low, tight, and electric with the thrill of a major discovery. Marcus, you are not going to believe this, she said. Her words clipped and fast. Serenity Point. The whole damn thing. The entire development was built on land acquired through a massive federal redevelopment grant administered by HUD. A huge one. We're talking millions. And a non-negotiable condition of that grant, the core covenant, was full and exemplary ADA compliance, well above the local minimums. They got tax breaks, infrastructure subsidies, the works. The developer, this company called Prescott Homes, certified in writing, on federally mandated forms, that every single aspect of the construction was built to code. Ramps where needed, accessible common areas, zero-grade entries on a certain percentage of homes, a mechanical lift at the community pool, the whole 9 yards. And it's not compliant, Marcus asked, his heart beginning to beat a little faster, already knowing the answer. It's not even close, Sarah confirmed, her voice laced with prosecutorial fury. It's a catastrophic failure of compliance. I pulled the architectural plans they filed with the county and used a source to get the internal use-only blueprints. I compared them to the certified plans they submitted to the federal grant office. They're completely different. They cut corners everywhere to pad their profit margin. The community center restrooms are too small for a standard wheelchair to even make a turn. The pedestrian pathways have gradients that are dangerously steep. There are no zero-grade entries on any of the Phase 1 homes. And the community pool. There's no lift. There's not even the reinforced concrete pad and electrical conduit required for a future installation. They lied. Marcus. They committed massive, multi-million-dollar wire fraud against the United States government. And then came the final, devastating piece of the puzzle, the keystone that locked the entire corrupt arch into place. Guess who was the on-site project manager and signatory for Prescott Homes during the entire construction phase of Serenity Point? Sarah said, her voice dropping with dramatic significance. And guess who was the very first person to buy a house in the community and was appointed the initial developer-controlled HOA president as the explicit condition of her generous severance package when the project was officially completed? It all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Karen Davenport. She wasn't just an overzealous HOA president, obsessed with aesthetics and property values. She had been a key, complicit player in the original, foundational fraud, her entire 6-year reign of terror, her obsessive, fanatical enforcement of rules, her relentless campaign to maintain a flawless, undisturbed, and uniform image for Serenity Point. It was all a desperate, frantic cover-up. She wasn't just protecting her vision of a perfect neighborhood. She was protecting herself from a federal prison sentence. Maya's bright pink tricycle was, to her paranoid, guilty mind, a terrifying symbol. It was a rolling, glittering advertisement for the very concept of disability. The one thing, the one specific vulnerability, that could bring her whole corrupt house of cards crashing down if the wrong person ever started looking too closely. And by a stroke of sheer, cosmic bad luck for Karen Davenport, the father of the child with the tricycle happened to be the one man in the entire federal district who was, professionally and personally, the exact wrong person. She's not trying to get rid of a tricycle. Sarah, Marcus said, a cold, hard, diamond-like clarity in his voice. She's trying to get rid of me, or at least scare me away before I start looking around. The impending HOA meeting was no longer just about a discriminatory bylaw. It had become the designated stage for a much larger, more significant drama. Karen Davenport had called the meeting to publicly ostracize a child and her father. Instead, Marcus would use it as a platform to expose a criminal conspiracy. He now held the thunderbolt, and, on Tuesday night, in front of the entire community, he was prepared to throw it. The quiet, peaceful life he had sought in Serenity Point had been a lie all along, a beautiful facade built on a foundation of greed and deceit, and he was about to tear it all down to the studs. The community center's meeting room was a temple of beige, a sterile, soulless space designed to suppress individuality. The fluorescent lighting hummed with an irritating buzz, casting a flat, unflattering glow on the faces of the assembled residents. The air was thick and stagnant, heavy with the scent of cheap coffee and collective anxiety. It was a standing-room-only crowd, a testament to Karen's ability to whip up drama. Marcus found a seat in the back row, a solitary, calm figure in a turbulent sea of neighborhood politics. He had set up a small, discreet camera on a tripod nearby, its red recording light a tiny, watchful eye. At his feet was his laptop bag. He had arranged for Maya to have a pizza and movie night with her best friend's family, a shield against the ugliness that was about to unfold. But he had brought a small, framed photo of her, her smile wide and joyous as she sat on her trike. He placed it carefully on the empty chair beside him, a silent, powerful reminder of precisely what and who he was fighting for. At the front of the room, Karen Davenport stood at a handsome wooden lectern, flanked by her two loyal, grim-faced board members. She looked impeccable, radiating a serene confidence in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than a month's rent on his first apartment. She was in her element, the undisputed benevolent dictator of her meticulously crafted kingdom. She banged a small, polished gavel, and an expectant hush fell over the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice a smooth, confident alto, honed by years of chairing such meetings. "I know we are all busy people, but the issue before us tonight is one that strikes at the very heart of our community, the preservation of the high standards of living and aesthetic harmony that we all agreed to when we chose to invest in Serenity Point." She spoke for nearly 15 minutes, her speech a masterclass in coded, exclusionary language. She never once said Maya's name. She never mentioned the word disability. Instead, she wove a tapestry of phrases like maintaining visual harmony, ensuring the safety and accessibility of our pedestrian pathways, and preventing the unfortunate accumulation of unsightly personal clutter on common property. The proposed bylaw, which she now read aloud with solemn gravity, was a marvel of discriminatory engineering, a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses designed to outlaw Maya's tricycle without ever naming it. It was aimed at one child, but it was worded to sound like a reasonable, universal rule for the protection of all. "This is not about any one person," she lied, her eyes sweeping the room. "This is about protecting our collective investment. It is about fairness. We all follow the rules. There can be no special exceptions, no special treatment." I now open the floor for a brief discussion before we move to a vote. A few of her known supporters spoke up first, well-rehearsed testimonials about the importance of property values and the dangers of letting standards slip. Then, a man in the front row, a sycophant named Gerald, who was known to be Karen's right hand, stood and pointed a challenging finger toward the back of the room. "I think we all need to hear from Mr. Thorne." I think he owes his neighbors an explanation for his recent destructive behavior and his flagrant and public disregard for our community's clearly stated rules." It was the cue. Every head in the room turned to face Marcus. This was the moment they had orchestrated. The public shaming. The final turn of the screw. Marcus calmly picked up his laptop bag, his movements unhurried, and walked to the front of the room. He bypassed the lectern and stood in the open space beside it, placing himself on the same level as the other residents. He set his laptop on a small table and connected it to the room's large, ceiling-mounted projector. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice quiet but clear, carrying to every corner of the room with an authority that had nothing to do with volume. He turned to face his neighbors, his expression serious and direct. "I don't believe I owe anyone an explanation, but I will offer some important clarification. The non-standard recreational equipment Ms. Davenport is so concerned about is my daughter's adaptive tricycle. It is a medical mobility device. The law of this country, a law that supersedes any HOA bylaw, is crystal clear on this matter. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it is afforded the same legal rights and protections as a wheelchair. Therefore, creating a special rule to prohibit it is illegal, and chaining it to a light pole, as Ms. Davenport did 2 days ago, is also illegal." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's face paled, but she held her ground. "This has nothing whatsoever to do with any disability. Mr. Thorne, this is about one thing, and one thing only, following the rules that everyone else abides by." "Is it?" Karen Marcus asked, turning to face her directly, using her first name for the first time. A small but significant shift in the power dynamic. "Because it seems to me that this is all about fear. It's about your fear of what my daughter's tricycle represents. It represents disability. And disability, it turns out, is something that the founders of Serenity Point have been trying to hide from, and profit from, for a very long time." With a single, deliberate click of his mouse, the projector screen behind Karen flared to life. Displayed on it was a high-resolution satellite image of the Serenity Point development. "This entire community," Marcus announced, his voice now resonating with the full, unmistakable authority of a federal prosecutor addressing a jury, was built with over $12 million in federal grants and tax subsidies, all of which were contingent on the developer, Prescott Homes, adhering to strict, federally mandated ADA accessibility standards. He clicked the mouse again. A new image appeared on the screen, a side-by-side comparison of two documents. On the left were the architectural plans Prescott Homes had submitted to the United States government, showing wide, accessible doorways, a network of ramps, and a detailed schematic for a fully accessible community pool, complete with a mechanical lift. On the right were the actual, as-built plans that had been quietly filed with the county clerk's office, showing narrower doorways, no ramps, and a pool with no disabled access at all. The discrepancies were stark, undeniable, and damning. Prescott Homes committed fraud on a massive scale, Marcus declared, his voice like a series of hammer blows in the stunned silence. They lied to the federal government to obtain millions of dollars in public funds. They built a community that is illegally and knowingly inaccessible to people with disabilities, to our wounded veterans, to our elderly, and the person who oversaw this entire fraudulent project, the person whose signature is on every single one of the false federal certification documents, was their on-site project manager. He clicked the mouse one last time. A high-resolution scan of an internal memo from Prescott Homes filled the screen. It was a project completion bonus authorization. At the bottom of the document, next to the line marked Project Manager, was a signature. It's elegant, flowing script, now looking like a signed confession. It was, clear as day, the signature of Karen Davenport. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The residents were on their feet, shouting, pointing, their faces a kaleidoscope of shock, betrayal, and white-hot fury. Karen's allies in the front row looked as if they had been turned to stone. Karen stood frozen at the lectern, her face a grotesque, waxy mask of disbelief and pure terror. Her carefully constructed world, her entire identity, had been utterly and irrevocably demolished in the space of 3 minutes. You can't. That's not," she stammered, her voice a pathetic, strangled squeak. "My daughter's tricycle didn't threaten your property values." "Karen," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a coup de grace delivered with surgical precision. "It threatened your freedom. You were terrified that a child with a visible disability might attract the attention of someone like me, someone who knows the law. What you couldn't possibly have known, what was just your spectacularly bad luck, is that you didn't have to attract my attention." He paused, letting the weight of his final words settle over the room like a shroud. As the lead enforcement counsel for the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, you've had my undivided attention from the very beginning. The title, his real title, hit the room like a physical shockwave. Karen stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat as if to ward off an invisible blow. And at that exact cinematic moment, as if summoned by the forces of justice themselves, the main doors at the back of the room swung open. 2 men in dark, conservative suits, and a woman with a gold U.S. Marshal's badge on a chain around her neck stepped inside. They were not local cops. They moved with a quiet, unnerving efficiency, their eyes scanning the room, their presence instantly changing the atmosphere from chaotic to funereal. The stunned crowd parted like the Red Sea as they walked with grim purpose down the central aisle, their polished shoes making no sound on the cheap industrial carpet. The lead marshal, a tall, imposing woman with eyes that had seen everything, stopped directly in front of the lectern. She didn't look at the crowd. Her gaze was locked on the trembling, ashen-faced figure of Karen Davenport. "Karen Davenport," the marshal said, her voice calm, official, and utterly devoid of pity. "You are under arrest on behalf of the United States of America for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and multiple felony violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act." As one of the male marshals took Karen's arm and gently but firmly guided her hands behind her back, the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs being fastened was the only sound in the dead silent room. It was the sound of a cage door slamming shut. It was the sound of justice. Karen Davenport, the Queen of Beige, the tyrant of taupe, the guardian of a grand and profitable lie, was being led away. Her reign was over. Marcus watched her go, his face unreadable, before his eyes found the small, framed photo on the chair beside him, of his daughter, smiling out at the world. The fall of Karen Davenport was as swift and total as her reign had been absolute. The federal case against her and the now-defunct executive board of Prescott Homes was a legal avalanche, a perfectly documented open and shut case of massive fraud. Faced with irrefutable evidence and the looming threat of decades in prison, Karen's co-conspirators turned on her, each one scrambling to make a deal in exchange for their testimony. Her defense crumbled into dust, stripped of her home, her reputation, and her ill-gotten gains. She pled guilty, her arrogance replaced by a pathetic, desperate plea for leniency. A federal judge, unmoved, sentenced her to 4 years in a federal correctional facility and ordered her to pay a fine that ensured she would never again enjoy the lifestyle her crimes had afforded her. But the real, lasting change happened not in a distant courtroom, but on the quiet, tree-lined streets of Serenity Point itself. The HOA, exposed as a sham entity created to protect a criminal conspiracy, was immediately and forcibly dissolved by a federal court order. The community was placed under a temporary receivership, managed by an independent administrator whose sole tasks were twofold: to oversee the establishment of a new, transparent, and democratic homeowners association, and to bring the entire community into full and complete ADA compliance. A massive project to be funded entirely by the millions of dollars seized from the frozen assets of Prescott Homes. The physical and social transformation was breathtaking. Over the next few months, the drone of saws and the clang of hammers became the new soundtrack of the neighborhood. But these were not the sounds of new construction. They were the sounds of correction, of remediation, of promises finally being kept. Smooth, gently sloped curb cuts appeared at every intersection, seamlessly blending sidewalk and street. A wide, elegant ramp, constructed of warm-toned wood and brushed steel, was installed at the entrance to the community center. The cramped, inaccessible restrooms were gutted and rebuilt, spacious and thoughtfully designed. And at the community pool, a gleaming blue and stainless steel hydraulic lift was installed at the edge of the deep end, a silent, powerful monument to the battle that had been fought and won. The social fabric of the neighborhood, once stretched taut with tension and fear, began to reweave itself into a new and vibrant pattern, freed from Karen's oppressive, watchful eye. People began to talk to one another, to emerge from their beige boxes and connect. A new, interim HOA board was elected in a genuinely democratic vote, and among its new members was Mr. Gable, the quiet Vietnam veteran with a prosthetic leg, who had for years silently endured the daily struggle of the neighborhood's hostile design. He was now a vocal and passionate advocate for his fellow residents, his voice resonating with an unshakable authority born of lived experience. The community, once united by a superficial and brutally enforced aesthetic, was now being rebuilt on a foundation of genuine inclusivity, empathy, and mutual respect. On a blisteringly hot Saturday in late summer, the kind of day that shimmers with heat, Marcus took Maya to the community pool for the first time since the renovations had been completed. The air was alive with the happy chaos of families, the sounds of splashing and joyful shrieks echoing off the water. For the first time ever, Maya didn't have to sit on the hot concrete edge and dangle her feet in the water, watching her friends play in the deep end. Marcus wheeled her in her poolside chair over to the new lift. A young lifeguard, who had been specially trained in its use, greeted them with a wide, kind smile. He helped Marcus get Maya situated safely in the lift's chair. "Would you like me to operate the controls for you?" Maya the lifeguard asked. Maya shook her head, her eyes wide with a mixture of nervous excitement and fierce determination. "No. Thank you," she said, her voice clear and proud. "I can do it myself. My dad showed me a video of how it works." She reached out her small hand and, with a definitive push, pressed the large, blue button marked "Down." With a soft, almost silent hydraulic whir, the lift began to lower her, smoothly and gracefully, into the cool, sparkling blue water. The moment her body was submerged, casting off the weight of gravity, a look of pure, unadulterated bliss spread across her face. She let out a happy, unrestrained shriek of pure delight and pushed off from the chair, floating freely in the water for the first time in her life, her arms paddling, her legs weightless and buoyant beneath her. She was swimming. Marcus stood by the side of the pool, a silent sentinel, his heart swelling with an emotion so powerful, so profound, it almost brought him to his knees. This was it. This was the victory. It wasn't the conviction, the prison sentence, or the legal precedent he had set. It was this singular, perfect moment. The sight of his daughter, liberated and joyous, experiencing a simple freedom that had been callously denied to her by greed and prejudice. He had wielded the vast, impersonal power of the federal government, the sharp, cold sword of the law, all to secure this one, perfect, intensely private moment of happiness. He felt a presence beside him and knew, without looking, that it was Elena, her memory, her spirit, smiling with him. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Maya was on her tricycle, her mighty Starspeeder 5000. She was at the head of a small, laughing parade of other neighborhood children on their own bikes and scooters. They raced down the newly widened, perfectly smooth pathway that wound its way through the community's central park. A park that was now truly for everyone. Her laughter, clear and bright, echoed in the warm, still air, a sound of pure, untroubled, and triumphant childhood. Marcus's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a brief text message from Sarah. FYI, it's official. Davenport reported to Federal Correctional Facility in Alderson this morning to begin her sentence. Case closed. Marcus smiled, a small, weary, but deeply satisfied smile. He typed back a simple, two-word reply. Thank you, and slid the phone back into his pocket without a second glance. He didn't need the official confirmation. He could see the results of his work. The true resolution. All around him. He saw it in the accessible design of the park. In the easy, relaxed way, neighbors from different backgrounds now stopped to chat. And most of all, he saw it in the radiant, unstoppable joy on his daughter's face as she sped off into the golden light of the setting sun, free, unbound, and home. The quiet life he had sought for them had turned out to be a battleground, but by fighting and winning the battle, he had helped build a true sanctuary, a community not just of perfect houses, but of open hearts, and, for the very first time, Serenity Point truly, finally, lived up to its name.